So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we are going to be back on 0.96.1 with a large-scale battle as well. This one, of course, as I'm sure you can see, is on the revamped version of CAIR ANDROS, which WK made. This, along with his revamped Dol Amroth, is probably the one that I've shown least, because they are both very, very large, and you do need a lot of players to actually make it work. In contrast, I suppose, to the other maps are large, but you can get away with having a few less players on them, whereas this is, obviously, to get the most out of it, there's a lot of city to cover. There's the keep at the back here, and it's very large scale. Probably slightly smaller than Dol Amroth at the very least, but even so, CAIR ANDROS, you do need a rather large and full lobby to make best use of it. And actually it is somewhat lore-friendly, because it is going to be a Gondorian-led reclamation attempt on CAIR ANDROS itself, with the forces of evil this time on the defence. So that's something that you don't see in every battle, certainly. And I believe that it is a 4v3, so there are going to be 3 defenders and 4 attacks, of course. We'll go through the attackers first of all. So we're going to have the forces of good on the attack for once. Starting off with the first of the Gondorian armies we're going to mention here on the left-hand side of the minimap there, with 13 Pavlos 27. He's got some Wardens of the White Tower over here. I'm actually quite glad that we're not going to have to fight on the snow, because snow is always something that I've really struggled to make work in Reshade. It's always been a bit luminous. But fortunately for us, that's not going to be a problem within the city itself. So the ground is a little bit bright, but that isn't going to actually affect the battle in any way, shape or form here. The Elisar's Vanguard also here, again, multiple HP, General's Bodyguard unit with the two-handed sword here. Not quite on the same level as something like the Haven Guard from Dol Amroth, but they are very well armoured, and they should be able to handle most of the basic Orc units very, very easily. It's going to take something a bit more special to stop the Elisar's Vanguard 1-to-1, like the Temple Executioners. We also have the CAIR ANDROS Swordmasters, so quite an aggressive selection of elites here that Pavlos has brought. The CAIR ANDROS Swordmasters, of course, good skill, not multiple HP, but still, like pretty much every Gondorian infantry unit, they do have very nice armour, especially in comparison to the other human factions. We also have the Nimlothian Honour Guard over here again, the Shielded Fountain Guard, as they are sometimes referred to as their old name. Very, very good again. I'd say that this is probably the safest General's Bodyguard unit to bring as Gondor, because they are so good at what they do. AP, obviously very good at protecting themselves with the armour and shields as well. Moving on, we of course have the Standard Fountain Guard as well with the Phalanx. The Standard Fountain Guard, very much in 0.96, are the heart and soul of the Gondorian army. They will always, of course, be one of the strongest units that Gondor can field, but they won't be quite as reliant on them in 0.97 with the upcoming improvements to spears and the like. It should make Gondor's front line a little bit less dependent on the Fountain Guard at the very least. But the Fountain Guard will still, of course, be a very, very difficult unit to break down from the front, as they always will be, and always have been. And then we have a couple of units of Citadel Guard as well, so this is actually a very elite army from Pavlos, really. He's brought all of Gondor's heavy hitters, for the most part. Citadel Guard, of course, are AP as far as spears go. That is something which is going to stay the same in 0.97 as well, so in 0.96 they are one of the few spear units which are worth it for the most part. At least some more of the expensive spears, stuff like the Wardens of Tirithea, tend to be a little bit underwhelming in melee, because they do still have to spear malice and they are still quite expensive. Citadel Guard, however, with that AP, can hold their own on the front line, so it certainly sort of goes some way to recouping their larger cost. Good at dealing with cavalry, of course, and they will be even better in 0.97 with the spear buffs as well. We've also got a Gondorian catapult here, several units of rams, but of course that isn't going to be necessary until they get to the keep at the back of CAIR ANDROS. You can see it just poking through the trees over there, including the black ships of Mordor. So we also have the Pelagian Marines, obviously good to have the Javelin Men. He's also got some upgraded Axemen of Lasanak. I believe this is only the first level of armour upgrade though, so they are not fully upgraded. But even so, the Gondorian shock units, which again, what really sets this unit apart from its peers in the other human factions is the fact that they do have a significant amount of armour, more than the equivalent units from the other factions. So again, it is very much Gondor's defining characteristic. And some CAIR ANDROS Marksmen, which double as pretty damn good sword infantry unit as well, two-handed sword unit anyway. They can hold their own in melee. They're obviously very well armoured at range. They should be a little bit better in 0.97 as well, with how the archers are being rebalanced. As it is, expensive archers of this nature, it can be a little bit difficult to be cost effective with them. The CAIR ANDROS Marksman's saving grace is the fact that they are so good in melee. Meanwhile, moving on to the second Gondorian army on this side of the river, we have Decor, and he has got some Pelagian Marines again, CAIR ANDROS Swordmasters. He's also got some Gondor infantry. One thing which Pavlos did not bring any of was the sort of the mainline Gondorian troops, the infantry and the spears. This is something that Decor has brought, obviously the Gondor infantry. They're really at their best when you upgrade their armour. You can upgrade it by 2 levels, which is what sets Gondor apart a little bit from their peers. As it is, when their armour is unupgraded, they are very basic. Even so, they should still be able to do very well against equivalent Orc units. Another unit of Gondor infantry there, as well as another unit of CAIR ANDROS swordmasters. The rest of his army, meanwhile, is going to be further down through the wintry trees over here. He's got some cavalry, actually, so he's got some Gondor cavalry. Again, they do not have the armour upgrade, but I can imagine that this was used as a defensive measure. Gondor's cavalry is pretty average, for the most part. They do rely on their allies in Dol Amroth and Rohan to supply the cavalry a little bit more so after all, but the Gondor cavalry are spear cav, so as a defensive tool they could be very useful for sort of zoning out any defensive cavalry, which I do know the defenders do have a few units of cavalry of their own, so we shall see how that plays out. So Ramasekal garrison pushing up the tower as well, so again much more in the way of lower tier troops here from Decor. He's got some Gondor infantry here at the front. I'm surprised it's not a unit of spears actually. They're opening themselves up to be charged if the cavalry is right there. A couple of units of guards of Osgiliath are right here as well though, so again a very solid unit of pikes this. Very much along the same sort of lines as something like Uruk-hai pikemen, Ranadine pikes. That sort of level is what you can expect them to perform at. But you can't bring as many as quite a lot of those other factions. You can only have 2 before the cost increases, so that is a bit of a potential problem there if you're going up against a mass pike force. The guards of Osgiliath can find themselves a little bit outnumbered, but they are still very good individually. Speaking of which, we do have another unit of Fountain Guard over here, so there's a lot of Fountain Guard on display. Some Gondor archers, a little bit more of a missile presence over here. Of course, it's very possible that Pavlos does have some units hidden in those trees up there. We shall see. Palagir Marines pushing the ram. We have the Elisar's Vanguard once again. Very strong unit, as we've said before. And then finally, the General's Bodyguard unit for Decor is going to be the Wardens of the White Tower. So moving over to the right-hand side of the map now, as we skip over the settlement, we do not, well, it's not an entirely Gondorian force on display today. We do have Ending Flame over here, who's going to be playing as Rohan, so obviously this, presumably, would take place just after the victory that was won at Minas Tirith, because now, obviously, the Gondorians and the Rohirrim are going to be marching towards Sauron's realm. So, fortunately for me, he's got all of his army sort of laid out in columns, so it's going to be very easy to go through them. Looks as though his General's Bodyguard is going to be the Meduzeld Guard, so this is obviously a Javelin sort of General's Bodyguard infantry hybrid unit, to be fair. They are going to be renamed, I believe, the Keepers of the Golden Hall in 0.97. They're very, very damaging. They are one of the strongest Javelin units in the game. They're not quite as strong as the Demons of the Desert at range, I don't think. In melee, however, it might be a different story, because they are very potent in melee indeed. So a pretty decent all-round unit. Obviously, the downside to any General's Bodyguard unit really is the fact they're going to have a low unit count. So you do need to be a little bit careful. You can't obviously send them out front and centre, because every archer unit in the realm is going to be gunning for them. But still, very good all-round unit, potentially a very strong one, as long as you keep them in the late game. Could be a match winner, this one. Also, the Hornberg Sentries, another one of Rohan's very high-tier troops. Obviously, in a map like this, Rohan are going to have to fall back on their infantry a little bit more than they otherwise would. And the Hornberg Sentries are certainly a unit that can do that very good. Bodyguard tier with their AP as well, so they're going to be able to crunch through the armour of some of those Orcs and Easterlings that are going to be on the defence. The Eowyn Shield Maidens, which for the time being are still AP, they will be losing that. Obviously, every axe thrower is going to be made, well, non-AP in 0.97. And that's to sort of differentiate them from Javelins a little bit, because as it stands they are the same thing. To have them be different units you need to sort of differentiate them a bit. But they will be having their base damage increased as a result, so it's not all loss. I mean, AP is better than just having a higher base damage, because obviously heavily armoured troops with good shields are going to be able to absorb axes from the front pretty easily in the future. However, if you can catch them from the rear, or if you're going after sort of more lightly armoured targets, the axe throwers are going to be very, very good at killing them very quickly. But for the time being, they are still AP, so in conjunction with something like the Hornberg Sentries here, very, very potent indeed. A large archer force as well, made up of Helmingas and Riddermark archers, of course. So again, Rohan's archer force on foot is not the best, but it's not the worst either. It's sort of middle of the road in terms of what you can accomplish with it anyway. You may have less archer units overall, but they'll get the job done. Over here we do have some Westmark Marshals as well. Again, my personal favourite unit of Rohan, not because of sheer effectiveness, just because I like the look of them and I like what they're all about, but they are still a very strong axeman. I mean, overall, they are going to be stronger than something like the Axemen of Lasarnak. The Westmark Marshals have better stats, and obviously that AP is going to be very, very useful indeed. There's Westmark Infantry in here as well, and there's also going to be several units of spears, Westmark Spears and Riddermark Spears, so yeah, full force of Rohan there, their shields and their helms all perfectly in line. It's almost like an optical illusion even. And then we also have some Aerid of Aldberg. Now I'm not sure, some Riddermark Axemen as well, so that's more of a standard Axeman. The Aerid of Aldberg, Lancers, quick Lancers, but I'm not sure how useful they're going to be here, if they can sort of buckle the initial defences in the city, or the sort of the main settlement and not the keep. The Aerodivaldberg could do well, but if it gets to the point where they're besieging the keep at the end and they still haven't used the Aerodivaldberg in any sort of useful nature, then I would say that they're probably not going to be able to, because obviously, you know, the further and further back to the wall it gets, the more difficult it's going to be to use a unit of lancers like that. And then finally, we have Flame, who's going to be playing as Gondor. That is a player I don't believe I've seen before, but he has got some Gondor spears. The first player we've seen to bring some Gondor spears, which is odd. Some Ramessekal garrison as well. Gondor spearmen again, Gondor infantry. CAIR ANDROS swordmasters here. He's got some Ramessekal garrison once more. Gondor infantry, very much a bread and butter army this is looking like, so sort of a lot of the more basic units, but he is going to have a larger army as a result. He's also got some Ramessekal garrison over here. Gondor cavalry, and then finally his general, I'm sure, is this Warden of the White Tower. Based on what he's brought, he surely has some units hidden in the trees as well. For a start, we haven't seen any Athelian Rangers, which is always going to be a big no-no. You know, you always want to bring a unit of Rangers if you can in a siege like this. But now, let's go through the defenders, and we have one Runic army and two Mordor armies on the defence. Stu Balrog is going to be one of the Mordor armies. He has got some Orc fodder, and he's got some Númenórean Lancers here again. So, the Númenórean Lancers, it's not too surprising, I think, that the defenders have brought cavalry with 3 Gondorian armies. You know, they're not really known for being amazing on horseback, whereas both Mordor and Rhûn do have some very potent cavalry units indeed. But they do need to be careful, because the Gondor infantry is very spear-centric, so if they hang around for too long, they are going to be punished for it. But the Númenórean Lancers could still do a very hefty amount of damage indeed. Over here we also have the Númenórean Shadow Guard again. The Mordor Rangers, it's very unsurprising to see Rangers. I would imagine we're going to see another unit of them, and the Carmel Shadow Bows as well. Some Orc Javelins. Cheap Javelins always going to be a good pick against armour-heavy factions like Gondor. Sauron's Will, again, same sort of philosophy here. Good AP unit. They're also going to do their best to sort of keep the units around them in the fight, because I believe they have an inspiration effect. It's inspiration or fear. I think it's inspiration though, which is very handy for the Orcs, needless to say. And we also have some Minas Morgul Chosen, very good heavy spear units again. Not going to kill things that quickly, but they will hold for a long, long time. But again, against AP units, you know, Rohan and Gondor are not short on AP units. They will struggle a little bit. And back here we have a full line of Morannon infantry. So again, this is going to be the core of Stud Balrog's initial defence. Lots of numbers tied up here just to sort of get in the way, while other units do the vast majority of the damage. Son of the Dunedain is going to be playing as Rhûn. He's got some Variag mercenaries and some Eastron clansmen over here, backed up by some of Stud Balrog's Orc fodder, as well as some Gamprim over here. Again, we saw Rhûn in action not so long ago in a scenario, and they performed very, very well for themselves. The AP can be very, very handy indeed, especially, again, Gondor. The armour does make them more resilient than the other Kingdoms of Men in many cases. However, it is a no-brainer to bring AP against Gondor, because very, very little in their army doesn't rely on armour in some capacity. So Rhûn are obviously very well situated to fight against that. Dark Elven King, who is the one who sent me this replay, so big thank you to him, has got some Morannon Guard out here, obviously the second Mordor player. He's also got some Orc Archers out here, some Orc fodder. Again, Minas Morgul Chosen. The Black Legion of Barad-dûr, which traditionally we've seen be used as an aggressive tool to just push through enemy lines. In this case, we're going to see the other side of them, perhaps, where they can be used as a defensive bulwark to make sure that enemies cannot push through them. Again, they are not the best in sustained combat. You know, they do lack a little bit in terms of their damage and their overall stats in melee. The mass is really the main selling point. But with those big old shields, and provided they're backed up properly, that will make an excellent anchor for the line. Again, unsurprising to see the Flag Rim. Their AP will come in very handy against the Gondorian main line. Some Morannon Guard, Orc Archers. We also have some Trolls, the Mountain Trolls, and more Orc Javelins. And then we do have the Carmel Shadow Bows, like I said, the Rangers, obviously. Very unsurprising to see them. This, however, is a very bold call. Again, the Chariots are pretty much the ultimate in high-risk, high-reward units in the game. Because if you can keep them moving, they will do a lot of damage, Mumakil levels of damage. However, if they do get stuck, particularly against spear and pike heavy factions, or polearm heavy factions, I suppose I should say in Gondor's case, they will get burnt down pretty quickly. You know, in spite of their large hit point pool and damage potential, it's still something that can get stuck. And they can also get separated, which can make controlling them very, very awkward. But still, potentially the Runic War Chariots could be used to devastating effect here. And then they already have their units which they're going to be keeping back for the final stand, including the mighty Carmel's Chosen. Not quite as strong as the Wardens of the White Tower, but not far behind. Some Orc Javelins over here as well. We have a couple of units of the Scion Rim as well. The tankiest of the Loka units. Obviously the spears, though, also the least damaging. But not to worry, the Flag Rim are here as well with their AP. Also some more AP in the Carmel's Shadow Guard. Obviously those big halberds crossed with axes. The Temple Guard are here. Obviously the AP missiles could be very, very handy indeed. The Nazgul from Stewed Balrog is going to be his general, I believe. And speaking of which, actually no, his... maybe. I mean, the general has got exactly the same model as the Nazgul, so it can be... Actually no, that's Stewed Balrog's general, it must be. Because one of the Nazgul is over here in the upgraded Temple Executioners. A couple of units of E-Strong crossbows. Again, crossbows when you're on the defence can be very, very potent indeed. Sauron's Will, a Troll Catapult, Olag Kai, so again, a lot of elites back here as you would expect. Nazgul, more Temple Guard, Temple Executioners, Baltros Tribesmen, Dragon's Wrath crossbows, another unit of Shadow Guard, and the Black Legion. So again, this is a good defence, but they certainly need to make sure that they make the enemy pay for trudging through the city, because a lot of their elites are back here. There is a case for saying that maybe they haven't got as many elites as they will need to hold the city, depending on how quickly and how aggressively the 4 attackers decide to converge on them. But I will make a little cut, because it does take the attackers, well, traditionally it takes the attackers quite a long time to sort of get into position where they're ready to cross the bridges and the river crossings on this map. So I will make a cut as the attackers start to move into a position where they can attack the city. Not a large cut at all, mainly because the Variag mercenary is deploying quite far forwards here. Perhaps the slightly scattered nature of Decor's army has sort of convinced Son of the Dunedain that he needs to sort of move forward and take advantage of this a little bit. Now the Gondor infantry with their shields should be able to withstand basic arrow fire like the Variag mercenaries relatively easily. But even so, I mean, they don't have the armour upgrade, so they're not quite as tanky as they otherwise would be, although you can see here that Decor is going to be moving his Gondor infantry up onto the bridges from the outset. And this is going to, I think, force the Runic player to retreat once more. Here we can see the sorcery of Rune as they are quite literally walking on air. And obviously the Variag mercenaries are here. They're just going to try and get as many kills as they possibly can. Again, the Variag mercenaries are actually a very good unit to use in skirmish fights with other archers, because of course they do have that nice little shield which makes them just that little bit more survivable, and they're not overly expensive either, the Variag mercenaries, so they are a very efficient unit. Son of the Dunedain does need to be careful here, however, because it doesn't look like he's actually going to be retreating at all. He needs to get out of there quickly, because the Variag mercenaries, while they will pull out those axes in melee and do their best, they are still not going to be as good as a unit of dedicated line infantry that the Gondor infantry are. Even without the armour upgrades, the Gondor infantry will take on a unit of archers in melee relatively comfortably. But of course this is going to be the good old kiting tactics here. The Son of the Dunedain can just sort of shift back and then maybe try and shoot them in the back as the Gondor infantry then moves back. But there's really no reason for Decor to give up this territory that he's already got. I mean, Decor is just trying to sort of gather his army together once more. You can see here that the Variag mercenaries have turned around and are starting to fire once more, and they're shooting into the back of the Gondor infantry, so the shields are not going to be in effect as they get shot in the back, and so a few more unit models will start to fall. But of course the defenders are outnumbered, so they are going to need to sort of get what kills where they can as efficiently as they can, because the fight is definitely stacked against them, I think. I mean, Mordor and Rune definitely have some good high tier units which they can sort of use as a crutch in the late game, but I mean Gondor in particular have got a lot of really nasty high-end infantry units, which if it comes down to a fight between elites at the end, I mean, I don't think the Nazgul are going to be enough to take that home all on their lonesome. All of those units of Nimlothian Honor Guard, Wardens of the White Tower, it's a lot. Positioning could be key here though. Stuff like the Rangers could come into it a lot. Gondor infantry still taking a few losses, but the Gondor archers are now in position as well. Now they do not have shields. Their base armor value should be better than the Variag mercenaries, but again, in a fight of sheer positioning here, Rune definitely have the advantage. They got their archers in position first. They also got the first volley off, the all-important first volley. This could be really devastating for the Gondor infantry, however, because Son of the Dunedain is going to be using his runic war chariots to come forward here, and they are just going to plough into the Gondor infantry, and they should be able to do a lot of damage as they try and force their way through here. Obviously, as you can see, the bridge model doesn't fully line up with the terrain that the units can actually cross, but the chariots not able to force their way through, so they're going to have to fall back. So if they stay in melee for too long, they're going to find themselves in trouble. I did notice those Númenórean Lancers over there, don't worry. We will keep an eye on the mini-map there to see what's going on, so a bit of cycle charging going on here. The Númenórean Lancers, of course, could be very devastating to Gondor, but by the same token, there are Gondor cavalry over here, so that's Spear Cav. The Númenórean Lancers are probably good enough to beat the Gondor cavalry if they get a nice charge off first. But even so, the Númenórean Lancers are much more expensive than the Gondor cavalry as well, so the defenders definitely need to make best use of their investments, and a unit of Lancers is, again, risk-reward. Especially in a siege. Here come the Runic War Chariots again. Again, none of them have actually died yet. They're going to charge in once again, and I think this unit of Gondor infantry is probably going to be destroyed here. I mean, I can't imagine that they're going to be eager for this fight for too much longer. I mean, these runic war chariots are really giving them the business, although that is a unit model that is down now, so I mean, these runic war chariots, they can't really afford to just throw themselves up against the unit of Gondor infantry and sort of expect that to be the best use of their time. Meanwhile, a very nice catch here is Decor leaving his general undefended and the Númenórean Lancers coming in with the charge. However, the Wardens of the White Tower, as you can see, I think they only lost one unit model in that charge, and that is testament to really how durable the Wardens of the White Tower are. Multiple HP, obviously, very, very good melee defense as well. There are some CAIR ANDROS Swordmasters back here, which would be another pretty nice target. However, with the Gondor Cavalry so hot on their heels, the Númenórean Lancers are probably going to want to get out of here. I mean, they are running out of room to manoeuvre here. In fact, Stu Balrog is just going to turn around and try and rely on the quality that these Black Númenóreans have to defeat the anti-cavalry bonus of the Gondor Cav. We'll see. I mean, this is definitely not a cost-effective use of the Númenórean Lancers' time, and you can see that several of them do die, the Gondor Cavalry holding their own there. That's exactly what the Gondor Cavalry is meant to be used for, defensive like that. Númenórean Lancers, on the meantime, I mean, if they had some Melkor's chosen to support them, I mean, this is a very bold charge, this. They're charging in. They do charge into the back of the Fountain Guards, so they will be able to kill off a lot of them, to be fair. The Fountain Guard, unlike the Wardens of the White Tower, do not have multiple HP. That was bold, though, because if those Fountain Guard turned around, if Decor was able to turn those units around, it would have been absolute devastation. The Fountain Guard, braced from the front in phalanx formation, would melt a unit of Númenórean Lancers. But as it was, he got a good charge into the back there, so good awareness there from Stu Balrog, but he is being mercilessly pursued by the Gondor Cavalry, but so far the Mordor micro has been of higher quality than the Gondorian one. Gondor is still a little bit scattered here. I think Decor, he needs to just sort of form up a nice defensive position here. I mean, he's moving some of his units across the bridge still. I don't think he's ready. I don't think he's set for that yet. I think he needs to wait until Pavlos comes down to give him a hand, because this cavalry is going to find gaps if he scatters out this far. I mean, he is starting to shoot the Númenórean Lancers with arrows now, which is not great for him. The Númenórean Lancers so far have done pretty well for themselves. I mean, I still think they need a couple of charges before they pay for themselves, and that is another good catch, though. The Pelagia Marines, this could be the end for them, however, because the Númenórean Lancers they really went in, and they are already shaken. They did get a nice amount of kills there on the Pelagia Marines. They are going to escape without breaking, but they are really starting to feel the effects of being on the offensive for so long. Again, if they had a unit of Melkor's Chosen in support, I feel as though this Gondorian army would be in serious trouble right now, because the Melkor's Chosen would make mincemeat of the Gondor Cav. It would mean the Númenórean Lancers are more free to sort of pick off these units as they advance, but obviously it would have been very risky indeed to bring two units of cavalry from a Mordor perspective, especially seeing as that would necessitate cutting a unit of perhaps Nazgul or Temple Executioners for the final stand. But still, he's going to retreat to the town, well, to the town itself now, which is probably fair. I mean, he's done a fairly decent amount of damage, and there is obviously the potential that he will be able to use his cavalry within the city later on, closer to the support of his own units as well, so they're not going on a sort of a one-man crusade, or one-unit crusade out here. There's more Gondor cavalry sort of slowly marching through the shallower section of the river here. Those 2006 water textures. You can see the Sauron's Will here. Now the Gondor cavalry, unlike melee cavalry, spear cavalry is like a sort of nice halfway house between melee and lance cavalry. So they can actually get some good charges off, but the Gondor Cav is, especially without the armor upgrade, a little fragile, because they don't have shields, so they do need to be careful. I mean, going in on their own, it's going to be very, very easy, I think, for Mordor to just sort of isolate and destroy them. And in the background over there, you can see the Ered of Oldburg. Ered of Oldburg will be a little bit more deadly if they get into a position, but again, the same principle applies. I mean, I can't imagine that Mordor are just going to let them walk into a position where it's going to be easy for them. There is a melee fight going on over here, meanwhile, pushing up the siege tower, trying to sort of get a position where they can block a lot of these arrows, which is a very legitimate strategy on this map. It's something which I've seen happen in most games, to be fair. However, the infantry engagement is now happening. All of these sort of low-tier units from each side sort of colliding. The Eastron Clansmen and the Orc Fodder taking on the Ramas Equor Garrison. I believe the Ramas Equor Garrison do have their armour upgrade though. It's a little bit hard to tell, but based on the fact that some of them have got their full chainmail, I think that is the case. And alongside the Eastron Clansmen, these are two militia units which can actually hold their own in melee. I would give the advantage to the Eastron Clansmen if both units were fully upgraded. As it is though, The Ramazak garrison will probably take it slightly. But even so, this is going to be no problem for the defenders. Already, the fact that Pelagear Marines are using their javelins on this initial defence is going to make the defenders very happy. Javelins like this are a very, very useful tool as the battle continues, because obviously their AP can be used to kill much more elite units than this, and you can see here that really the vast majority of these units on the front are lower tier orcs and easterlings, so the defenders will be all too happy to see the fact that these javelins are being used on lower value units like this. Even if, slowly but surely, these Ramazak garrison, they were winning on their own, now that they've got javelin support they will certainly push their way through this admittedly quite dense formation of lower tier units. You can see over here as well that the advance is starting to happen across the river as well. Once again, D-Corps is going to be taking point. So Pavlos is going to have to be the one to sort of follow through, because D-Corps has certainly been the attacker so far to have taken more damage than the others, having to deal with those chariots and those Numenorian lances pestering him. But Stu Balrog, once again, is going to be ready. He's got his defence ready, the Minas Morgul chosen on the front line. The most elite unit they have out here in terms of a melee unit is probably the Minas Morgul chosen of all of these units. Ooh, here come the fire arrows. There are some fire arrows from the Variag mercenaries. I don't think they're going to be able to break Pelagear Marines, to be fair. I mean, they've got those little shields, but also the Pelagear Marines are not garbage by any means. And they also don't have the best shot, the Variag mercenaries. I mean, it's a bit of a weird one up here on the bridge. There's also that siege tower, which is partially blocking the way at least. The chariots are now coming forward again. They have lost one of their unit models already, however. We'll see how effective they can be as the fight continues. Still, this Ramazak garrison at this point is winded. Obviously, lower tier units. You can see the Orc fodder is very tired. Obviously, the lowest of the low, so their fatigue is not going to treat them too well as this fight continues. But the Gondorians doing themselves proud so far, slaying these orcs, and the opposite is true as well. I mean, the defenders here are using a lot of their ammunition already. It may be on their sort of more basic units of archers, but this is ammunition which is not going to be able to be used when the attackers really come forward in force, because so far they're just sort of probing attacks. Hello. But once again, the defenders are the ones being aggressive here, and once again I think D-Corps is sort of overextended himself a bit, because the Gondor archers are here. And they are going to be charged by the Runic War chariots. Now, there's Gondor infantry. There's really nothing in close proximity that can kill the chariots. I mean, the Guards of Osgiliath are here, but they're going to move very slowly. The chariots do have elephant sound effects as well. Now, here come the Gondor Cav. Now, the main danger the chariots will face here is that they delve too deeply and too greedily. And the Gondor cavalry will be able to do some decent damage with their anti-cav bonus. But I think they're going to be able to get out of here without too much of a reprisal. So the Gondor archers taking a few unnecessary losses there. But again, I think it's fair to say that, based on the fact I've not seen a couple of these attackers before, they're slightly newer players. But I think this balances out nicely, because it means that the attackers, who usually have a substantial advantage when they outnumber the defenders are slightly more experienced in terms of the players, but the attackers have more numbers, and traditionally you would certainly expect the attackers to win on a fight that's on this scale with the advantages they have. So, like I said, balances itself out quite nicely, I think. For the time being, though, the sort of harassing units that Rune and Mordor have deployed have done their jobs. Admittedly, though, Gondor have not felt any grievous losses so far. That charge into the Fountain Guard was probably the most devastating thing, but Gondor have got so many Fountain Guard between the three armies that are actually here today, that I don't think that's going to bother them too much. At least not as much as it might. Those chariots are still going. You see the Ramazak garrison making real progress. Now that the Eastron clansmen are gone, it's just Orc fodder and they're carving through them. It's exactly the sort of fight that the Ramazak garrison are going to like. Still, D-Corps is leaving some of these infantry units out in front. You can see that a lot of these units are actually getting back up. Another one of the chariot, though, you can see that it pushed through and it got caught in the pikes, and obviously the pikes killed it off very, very quickly. I'm actually very surprised that the Guards of Osgiliath are not further forward. The Runic War chariots do, of course, have a missile attack, but it's very possible they've already used up all their ammunition. They've been so active so far. We shall see. The chariots are now going to sort of run away again. The pikes are going to be on the shore. This unit of infantry is finally going to fall back, going through a deeper section of water there as they go literally underwater for a second. The chariots are going to retreat once again. So they have lost a few unit models so far, but the chariots have also put some pressure on the Gondorians. D-Corps so far has been the one to sort of advance forward of all of the attacking armies. Pavlos' catapult starting to get into position again. The catapult, I'd be very, very tempted to try and save that for the keep at the end. Because when the defenders are dug in on that hill, it can be a pretty daunting prospect. But if you've got a catapult there, and they're already sort of bottled up into the corner. Can be very, very nasty for them. Turn their own sort of positioning against them. He might be tempted to use the catapult in the city here to sort of try and do some damage here to these defensive formations. You can see over here actually that I was keeping an eye on the minimap, and I did notice that the cavalry never actually got into the city, but it looks as though some Orc archers got into position and did kill off some of the Gondor cavalry. They got a little bit too close and they've been forced on the defensive once again. Looks as though Rohan is actually going to take the first advance here, which surprised me a little bit. I mean, there's a few units of Ramazekl garrison coming forward as well. It looks as though mainly spears are leading the way, which is good. I mean, I would certainly not want to see the shock infantry leading the way of Rohan, because that's good AP that would be filed into cheap archers, which would be able to get some massive value off the unshielded Rohan infantry. And the Rohan Axemen could be a very, very useful tool for dealing with some of the massed units of Orcs. Meanwhile, over here, the one melee engagement between infantry units which has been happening so far at the base of this siege tower, the Ramazekl garrison has been doing very, very well for itself. This one unit of militia has probably gotten in excess of 100 kills so far, so it's already easily done its job. However, while it's having no issues whatsoever at dealing with this Orc fodder, a unit of Morannon infantry will be enough to kill it off, especially seeing as they are now exhausted, and a unit of fresh Morannon infantry. I mean, it's as far as the Orcs go, Morannon infantry is the closest they have to a professional line infantry force, and yeah, that will be enough to defeat the Ramazekl garrison, even with the range support they're now getting. Again, CAIR ANDROS marksmen coming forward from Pavlos, so they're not shy to bring forward some of their stronger units, stronger ranged units, but I would argue that they aren't really making enough progress to make all of this investment worth it. And yeah, Pavlos is now starting to open up with his catapult. That is a fairly dense formation, but a lot of it is Orc fodder. I mean, again, it's all well and good if you do hit the Orc fodder, but, you know, the Minas Morgul chosen would definitely be the target here. Any Orc fodder you kill is merely a bonus. Catapult's pretty expensive as well. I mean, the defenders definitely know what they're doing here, because the units they truly care about are in loose. Fairly decent hit, but again, this catapult needs to get much better hits than that. I mean, he's not going to be able to get the full value for the catapult by just sort of lobbing these rocks across the river and into this one unit over here. And there are also reinforcements. I mean, there's Gampharim close by, the chariots are still here, there's all sorts over here. I mean, this catapult is not going to be enough to open up a hole into the settlement. Even if it continues to get kills on this Minas Morgul chosen, I don't think Stu Balrog will be too concerned, to be honest. I mean, the Orc fodder is sort of moving out into the river, which, you know, I mean, it's moving forward. It won't get very far. If it goes too far out, then the Gondor cavalry will just charge it, and the Orc fodder won't do too well in that situation. Meanwhile, here we can see some good positioning from Son of the Dunedain, the Variag mercenaries, up on the bridge, attacking the Rohirrim as they move forward. It is primarily the Rohirrim. There's still some cavalry units from Gondor and some militia from Gondor as well. But these Variag mercenaries in a very, very good position indeed to start shooting down on the Rohan forces as they cross the river. And again, I'm actually a little bit surprised at how, considering they're slightly newer players, maybe I shouldn't be so surprised, but, well, Ending Flame and Pavlos I've seen before, but I'm a little bit surprised that the attackers are not being a little bit more aggressive, because certainly if you have a look at the state of the battlefield, a lot of the defending elites are back in the keep, and you can very much tell that the defenders want that to be their final stand. This is a green light for you as the attacker to send forward a lot of your units very, very quickly across the river, get in there, and start doing a lot of damage very, very quickly. Again, it's potentially risky, because you will take damage on the approach, but being more conservative and being a little bit more considered like they have been, they've already taken damage like that, so for me, no, this is exactly the sort of situation where Rohan and Gondor need to attack quickly as one. I think I was kind of expecting them to after Decor started committing units quite early across the bridge, even before Pavlos was in the position to reinforce him, but now things seem to have slowed down a little bit. I think the defenders, or the attackers I should say, are a little bit too scared of the defensive skirmishers, which, considering most of what they can see is just runic and basic Orc archers, that's not really a cause to be concerned. I mean, here you can see Orc fodder, which has probably overextended itself just a little bit. You can see Dark Elven King does have his Orc fodder out in front, but this Orc fodder is going to be absolutely no match at all for actual units. Riddermark Spearmen and Ramazekl garrison once again coming forward, and the Orc fodder will very easily be dealt with by them. Maybe a little bit of a throwaway here, but it does. What this does do, this isn't completely without merit, because obviously the Orc fodder will achieve very little in melee, but it will keep all of these units bottled up and in a clump for those units of Variag mercenaries to get more kills, I should say. into the side of these units as they advance. This would be devastating, actually, if it was those Numenorian Shadow Guard. But even a unit of basic archers like this will still do a good amount of damage here. So this is good synergy. But you can see here that there is a gap. The Riddermark Spearmen are going to be able to get around. The Orc Fodder is already looking like routing. They are not enjoying this fight at all, as you would expect. The Orc Fodder. No one expects much of the Orc Fodder in melee. And they are being skewered by the Rohirrim. The Riddermark Spears are actually just bypassing them completely. I'm not sure to what end. I mean, they'd be much better off, I think, just rear charging and trying to break them quickly. Because if they charge forward, they're just going to find themselves at the mercy of the Minas Morgul Chosen, and they're going to sort of be surrounded. A single unit is certainly not going to be enough, especially not when there's all these archers in support as well. More archers are getting up on the bridge. Again, you have cavalry as the attackers. You can sort of back them up and try and charge across the bridge. At least make it so that their archers are not comfortable in sitting in that position. A little bit more of a proactive assault is needed here from the attackers, I think, because so far they're sort of funneling into very predictable paths, I think, for the defenders to deal with. These Minas Morgul Chosen still enduring the bombardment, but it's no real problem for them. This fight over here is still ongoing. I mean, they've actually been pushed back a little bit. Well, yes, they have been pushed back. So here you can see the Ramazekal garrison. Now that they're fighting a unit of Morannon infantry, especially after being in melee for so long with other low-tier units like themselves, they're finally sort of succumbing now. The Morannon infantry too strong. And again, well, there are some Gondorian reinforcements back here, but there's Gondor infantry moving forward, but it's a little bit too late here. Here come the Pelargir Marines, who are throwing their javelins into the Morannon infantry. They'll have no problem killing the Morannon infantry like that again. That's going to rout the Orc Fodder as well, but again, the problem the attackers have here is that there's not really the promise of them making any sort of progress anytime soon, because they've got the Flag Rim in back up here. I mean, even if they do a lot of damage to the Morannon infantry, allow that Gondor infantry to smash through the defences, like Flag Rim is a very good unit to deal with Gondor infantry. Meanwhile, this is a little bit more of a sort of massed assault here, as Gondor and Rohan sort of move as one. The Riddermark Spearmen and the Ramazekal garrison coming forward together. Already winded, however. And there's not a great deal of damage dealers here on the front line. There are some Gondor archers back there. Some Riddermark axemen starting to move across the river now as well. But again, militia, spears, this isn't really the sort of force which is going to give the Minas Morgul Chosen much pause. They are going to hold. But they're going to be relatively happy in this fight. Now, the Morannon Guard a little bit less so. The Morannon Guard are certainly not on the same sort of level as the Minas Morgul Chosen. But they're still going to hold here for some time. I mean, it's definitely not the sort of fight that they're going to shy away from immediately. Like if they were having a go up against high damage axemen, for example, and they took a charge from them, they're a little bit flimsy in that regard. There are some Riddermark axemen coming across the river now, but I do question whether or not they'll actually make it here in time before the damage is already done to the defenders. You can see here Stu Balrog, he had all of those units of Morannon infantry ready to be committed where needed, and here comes the second unit. And they are going to be sort of blocking off this position here. And again, militia, Ramazekal garrison says victory is almost a certainty. Again, numbers may be the issue here for the defenders. Numbers are rarely an issue for Mordor, to be fair, and there are these units in reserve they have. Morannon infantry coming forward. I can't imagine this unit of militia is going to last too long. With the attentions of all of these orcs. Here comes the Riddermark axemen. They're not actually under any sort of arrow fire at this point, because the defenders are pulling down from this bridge position, which I don't think they actually need to, surprisingly enough. They're still not being pressured from the bridge at all. As this fight continues, the Rohirrim and the Gondorian Spearmen in formation. Obviously the Orc Fodder is not going to be up to much. The Orc Archers, this unit must be out of ammunition, I suppose. Again, they are not going to be up to much in melee either, but just sort of blocking the way with a sea of garbage centred around that one unit of quality in the Minas Morgul Chosen has served the defenders well for the time being, although the Minas Morgul Chosen is taking damage. Maybe I underestimated the Riddermark Spearmen. I mean, with the presence of these Riddermark Axemen as well, the AP could be pretty nasty indeed. Over here we can see that they're finally sort of getting into a position, the Gondorians on the other side, to start attacking from the river crossing as well. Meanwhile, the bridge. More units have been committed forward. Here come the Variag mercenaries. The Orc Archers still just blocking the way. I mean, they're really just being fed in to sort of block the Gondorians for as long as possible, because they're a Citadel Guard in here now as well. which in conjunction with Gondor infantry is obviously going to have no issues with the Orc archers. And actually with the Citadel Guard, the flag room probably won't be enough to stop that assault either, so the defenders do need to sort of commit resources where necessary to sort of keep the attackers from gaining any sort of traction. Now this is going to be the problem, the fact that so much of this attack was made up of Ramsek garrison. Routing is going to be the issue. Usually the Gondorians are the ones causing the Orcs to mass rout, but the Gondorians here are leaving the Rohirrim up shit creek without a paddle, really. Here are the Riddermark Axemen, but again, they're not really able to gain too much of a foothold here. They need more units here. And again, one criticism that I've always had as well in matches like this traditionally is the fact that, you know, for the attackers, their reinforcements of all the defenders, actually, this is something which I've had happen, or seen happen, on both sides. Their reinforcements are just too far away. You know, this is happening here, but the reinforcements are still only halfway across the river. The Westmark infantry as well. If they had been committed at the same time as all of this Gondor militia, would have been a different story, I think. But as it is, not great. Meanwhile, these Riddermark Axemen are getting absolutely mulched by something, and it must be these Orc Javelins in position here. You know, the Riddermark Axemen, pretty damaging for their cost, certainly against a unit like the Morannon infantry, but with the support of those cheap Javelins right next to them, the Riddermark Axemen have already been cut down to size. Meanwhile, over here, where there wasn't really any elite troops, the Gondorians and the Rohirrim are actually making a little bit more progress. I mean, the Morannon Guard and the Orc Fodder and the Orc Archers, certainly not the last word in quality in terms of melee units. I think Mordor realise that because they're already using their Javelins to try and sort of even the odds over here as well, as the Ramsek garrison also moves forward. There's a lot more reinforcements crossing the river now, more Ramsek garrison. Again, I don't think that they are the answer. The Eowyn Shield Planes are coming forward, the Riddermark Axemen are routing off. Mordor are going to be able to sort of wrap up the lines here, and at this point, they're starting to surround individual units. So far this is a pretty poorly constructed assault by Rohan and Gondor. Meanwhile, I mean, at this point, seeing this unfolding on the other side, more pressure is needed on the other side. You know, you need to start committing forward quicker. It's been far too passive so far from the attackers. Over here, they are making slow and steady progress. The flag rooms still haven't been committed. I mean, I think the defenders do need to be a little bit careful themselves, because it doesn't look as though they don't have any reinforcements over here that would be ready to sort of plug this gap. A single unit of flag room is not going to be enough with the Citadel Guard here. There's also a lot of range support here from the Marines and the Marksmen. In fact, for some Axemen of the Sarnak as well. I mean, again, the attacks are pretty stretched. You know, there's not really a huge amount of reinforcements ready to take advantage of any gaps they make. There's a lot of arrows flying in as well. They do have the mountain trolls, but there are reinforcements back here. But the defenders do need to sort of be aware of this. They've done well so far, the defenders. They've certainly set out their stall a little bit more comprehensively than the attackers. Speaking of which, the attackers are now coming across this bridge. The Gondor Spearmen are going to collide with the Morannon Guard, and especially considering that they're fighting with superior terrain, the Gondor Spearmen should be just fine in tackling this unit of lower tier Mordor Spearmen. Reinforcements are here though, to relieve the beleaguered attackers from the front, and with Westmark Spearmen and Westmark Infantry, this should be enough to turn this fight around. The Westmark Infantry are pretty good, especially seeing as the Morannon Infantry were already damaged. The Minas Morgul Chosen are now tired. They've been in melee for quite some time. The reinforcements are here. Now the Orc Javelins still able to get some decent volleys off, but they are also sort of finding the attentions of all of the attacking skirmishers, so the Orc Javelins starting to take some damage. Another unit of them is being rotated in, however. Here come the Mountain Trolls. It's definitely all go on this front. The green of Rohan blanketing this area. There's the Gondorian catapult yet again, sort of ineffectually firing into the settlement, really. So many misses so far. Here come the Black Legion. I mean, the defenders feel fairly comfortable in sort of committing most of their resources in the city, I suppose, to trying to deal with this initial assault, which I agree with, actually. I feel as though for all of your resources in the town, you've done well enough on the very first defence to just sort of commit everything. And if you are determined to have that sort of force that you've got in the keep to sort of stay there, then this is probably the best way to go about things. The Westmark Infantry, however, certainly making their presence felt. The Westmark units in general, obviously for Rohan, definitely the more high quality main line that Rohan can field. It certainly shows, because they've definitely made a lot more progress than the Riddermark Spheres backed up by that Gondor militia did. Now, those Orc Javelins still proving to be a real pest. The Gondor Archers and the Riddermark Archers still doing their best. As soon as a gap appears, that cavalry should be poised to take advantage of it. Meanwhile, a genuine assault here, the CAIR Andros Swordmasters and the Gondor infantry, but again, a sign of inexperience. I think Decor needs to get these Guards of Osgiliath in here. Sending forward these units on their own was never going to go too well. You know, this was a very well constructed front line, solid. Not the best at dealing damage with basic units like spears and line infantry. But these CAIR Andros Swordmasters just got, it was like a brick wall they ran up against on their own. What you want is the Guards of Osgiliath in there, give you an anchor, and then you've got the pikes forcing the enemy back, and the damage that the Swordmasters can provide. As it was, the Swordmasters on their own just got overwhelmed. All Javelins getting in position again. Again, it's a single unit. It's been far too, again, wave-based for my liking from the attackers. But we'll see. I mean, they haven't committed anything overly important to themselves yet. But every unit does count in a fight like this. Meanwhile, these Morannon Guard certainly coming out second best to the Gondor Spears. There's routing orcs over here as well. The Trolls trying to sort of hold back these units now. The Gondor Spearmen and the Riddermark Spearmen are able to win over here at last. And over here, with the more elite Rohan infantry now getting into position, I don't think the Black Legion is going to be able to hold them back for too much longer. I mean, the Eowyn Shield Maidens have already used up their ammunition by the looks of things. So again, that was some... I did see them throwing their AP axes after all. And now the Black Legion are here, they're shaken. They'll be able to absorb arrow fire all day long with their huge shield value. But again, like I've said, in melee they aren't the best. And the Westmark infantry, backed up by the Eowyn Shield Maidens. The Eowyn Shield Maidens are a unit which encourages nearby units, so they're much less likely now to see routes on this front line. And here we can see the Ramazakul garrison starting to chew away at these Orc Javelins, definitely the sort of fight they like. And this might be the saving grace for Decor and Pavlos, because it does look as though, from the other side, Flame and Ending Flame are going to break through, and that is going to sort of free up some units to start attacking the rear of these front lines, because this front line over here is not... it's not substantial enough for my liking. You can see here the Guards of Osgiliath. I mean, it says victory seems certain. I'm sure eventually, with the support of these Gondorian pikes, damage enough could be done. They need more, I think. They've got all these units in reserve. It could be that this sort of play does benefit them in the end. Oof. And here we can see over here the runic chariots once again. I mean, this is a little bit more like it. We can see now more aggression. They saw an opportunity and they've taken it. They've committed forward more infantry. Unfortunately for them, the chariots were on station to start doing some damage. They also have the Carmel shadow bows, which are going to be able to do horrendous damage going in here. But they are sort of, now they're getting in behind the defences, which is always what you want to see. You don't want to just sort of grind up against the shield walls and phalanxes all day long. Eventually you're going to need to try and make something happen. And even though this maybe wasn't the smoothest in terms of execution, at the very least they are now starting to move in. And at the end of the day, this is just a battered and bruised unit of Gondor infantry that these Carmel shadow bows are using their ammunition on, as well as the Valchoth tribesmen. I mean, yeah, the CAIR Andros marksmen are not the cheapest unit to lose in this sort of capacity, but they've already used up their ammunition, presumably. We'll see. I mean, at the very least, they're putting pressure on the defenders, whereas before the defenders could have almost left the battle running without even looking at it up till now. Setting up their defensive lines, and that was that. But now the attackers are starting to make things happen. Númenorian Lancers pulling back. You can see here the Morannon infantry. The Black Legion also pulling back, so at this point, kind of in retreat. I mean, the Númenorian Shadow Guard are getting in position, I think, to try and shoot down this line, which this Gondor front line is looking a little bit worse for wear now. However, they are being forced to leave because the Gondorians now, this little secret pathway over here, able to sort of circumvent the problem. The Númenorian Lancers are coming in here, but they need to get out of there. The Guards of Osgiliath are right here, poking those two to death, and they don't even want to stay in melee with the CAIR Andros Swordmasters, to be honest with you. As a rider, you really don't want to be introduced to the business end of a Zweihander. The area of Alberg now pushing forward. This is what I like to see. Now that the defensive lines have started to fall apart, the attackers are using their cavalry. This is the moment in the battle where this cavalry is going to be at its most useful. If you don't use your cavalry in this portion of the battle, it's going to be next to useless in the assault on the keep, because the defenders have got their lines sorted out. But now is where the gaps are going to start to appear. Now is when the area of Alberg and the Gondor cavalry should be most useful. So it's good to see Rohan there using their units. And yeah, now we can see the defenders in full retreat. So initially things went very well for them, and I would say the defenders certainly took the better of those initial engagements. But the attackers now pushing in, and the attackers do still have a lot of resources at their disposal. The advantage of having one whole army more than your opponent. Some routing here from the Marauder infantry as well. There's Minas Morgul chosen. I mean, this is a bold charge, but it is also going to do a lot of damage to Marauder infantry as the area of Oldberg moving through. If these are the same orcs as the ones that fought at the Pelennor fields, they probably have nightmares about the horsemen of Rohan charging through their ranks. So it's unsurprising to see many of these orcs shouting retreat and running for the keep, the safety of their walls. I mean, we saw earlier on how effective a rear charge into a unit like the Gamprin can be when they took on the Fountain Guard, the Númenórean Lancers, but in the end they decided to turn around and kill off what remains of Stewed Balrog's cavalry. The Aerid of Oldberg. Here comes the Gondor cavalry from Decor. And again, now is the time. Now is the time they want to be using this cavalry. Like I said, the Númenórean Shadow Guard are right here. This would be public enemy number one if I was in command of any one of those cavalry units that the attackers have at their disposal, because rangers can be so potent when you're on the defence, especially in a position like the keep at CAIR ANDROS. If you can kill them before they get there, that's a big catch. And there's not really anything in well, there are some Minas Morgul chosen right here, but honestly, if I were to sacrifice a unit of lancers in this situation for their rangers, I'd take it, because the body piercing can be so effective. Meanwhile, they are catching some units at the very least. I mean, these Citadel Guardsmen here catching up to this Marauder infantry. As the defenders try to retreat, several of these units are being picked off, which is good to see. Some Gondor archers in position there as the Gondor cavalry retreats. Now this is, again, these Gamprim, unlike the Fountain Guard we saw in the earlier stages of the battle, the Gamprim this time were facing the right direction when the charge was coming in, so the Aerid of Oldberg there did the right thing by sort of pulling out of that charge, because if they decided to follow through on that, the halberds would have done horrendous damage to them. Here comes the Gondor cavalry. There's routing Marauder infantry. So this is going to be a very dense defence here from the defenders, because not only do they have those units that they've had all the time back here, but they've also saved a fair amount of units that they had in their outer defences. And considering how quickly their outer defences actually did fall apart, this is the right thing to do, to my mind. Like, usually, I kind of appreciate it on this map when the defenders sort of try and hold the centre of the city here. Usually CAIR ANDROS happens in sort of three waves. You have the bridges and the river crossings, then you have the city fight, then you have to fight in the keep. But I think with how quickly this cavalry sort of poured forwards and how the attackers are now moving, it is probably the right thing to do for the defenders to just sort of retreat everything. There are the Minas Morgul chosen. I mean, again, this is a bit of a foolhardy charge this from the Gondor cavalry. Not only is their charge not as potent as many lancers, but that was not a very good charge, and it was right into very heavily armoured spearmen. Minas Morgul chosen are not going to be too concerned with the fact that cavalry is buzzing around all over the place. Now this is what I like to see. This is good from Ending Flame. He has seen the Númenórean Shadow Guard, and he is going to charge them with his Aerid of Oldberg. They're eager, they're warmed up. That was a good charge. He's going to kill several of the Shadow Guard. He's also going to kill quite a lot of Marauder infantry. Very, very nice charge. I mean, this is his opportunity to kill them for good. I mean, certainly, Stewed Balrog is going to do everything within his power to try and get these Númenórean Shadow Guard in the walls, because even though they are now not as strong, and you can see here, I mean, he's better off actually keeping them in melee at this point, I think. Just kill them. Kill as many of them as you can. Because if you kill off enough of the unit, it does become a lot less scary. Rangers are all about the DPS they can inflict, and already that has been severely compromised. The Gondor cavalry in support as well, making sure that Marauder infantry couldn't act as much as a blocker as it could have done. But yeah, I mean, it's the right thing to do to know when you've to quit while you're ahead. The area of Oldberg definitely best off sort of getting away from there, because if they charge in there, it's all over for them. This unit of Marauder infantry, meanwhile, could be the next target for the area of Oldberg. Indeed they are. So this is good cavalry play here. I'm glad to see that they're using their cavalry now, because it will not be very useful when the time comes to assault the keep. But a lot of these units which were trying to retreat for the defenders have been picked off by the cav, which in many ways has already made up a little bit for the advantages that they've gained earlier on. The defenders has sort of squish things in a little bit. Indeed, I mean, the defenders are behind in terms of percentage of kills, so as much as I've been sort of ragging on the attackers for not playing this as well, and the defenders doing mostly the right things, the attackers are still in the lead. Having said that, this isn't a particularly typical example. Usually in this sort of fight you would expect the defenders to take the lead early on as the attackers sort of send their lower tier units forward to die, essentially, which happened earlier on, but now the fight has sort of swung in the other direction. With some good cav play, and sort of as the defensive lines fell apart, it was very quick. And to be fair to the attackers, they did well in sort of capitalising on that. But a lot of those units were retreated to the town centre now, to the keep. So now it's like the old version of CAIR Andros, where this was pretty much the entirety of the map, or the entirety of the important section of the map. So, do the defenders have what it takes to hold the line? I mean, they definitely have the right units. They've got rangers, even though one of them got mulched before they got here, really. They've got 2 units of Nazgul, they've got a lot of runic units, they've got javelins, they've got crossbows, trolls, Black Legion, Dragon's Wrath crossbows, artillery. They have all the tools they need to win this. The issue that they will face, I think, particularly when it comes to facing off against 3 Gondorian armies, is the fact that Gondor's infantry is good. It's of good quality. So this isn't like the reverse, where if this was like a sort of Gondorian defence against a sort of mass army of orcs, the orcs are always going to be somewhat reliant on their numbers. Whereas this time around, Gondor have the quality and they have now a numbers advantage. Rohan have also got a good amount of AP to their army, which will certainly help. So, how will they organise this? I mean, again, I think this is going to be sort of like the organisational phase. You can see here the Gondorian and the Rohan forces sort of pushing all of their siege equipment into position. There's still units that are actually across the rivers. There's actually a blue arrow over here. Is this still? Huh. How about that? The flag rim that were defending the bridge must have come over here. And they do have managed to rout off unit of Pelagian Marines, so this is a sort of nice little expeditionary force the son of the Dunedain has got. The brave Easterlings. Their golden armour not so much shining in the sun here, it's a winter's day, but still. There's a unit of Gondor archers over here. I mean, 14 flag red? That is enough Gondor archers where the archers should win if they charge into melee, but even so, this flag rim is not eager to let these Pelagian Marines get away. I mean, they will rout off the field regardless. There's not enough of them to come back from that. But still, son of the Dunedain just sort of chipping away at the attackers where he can. We'll see if my criticism of the defenders in the composition phase comes true, however. So I was slightly concerned they bottled up so many of their elites here in the final stand. They didn't have enough out here, and it was, you know, as soon as those Minas Morgul chosen were overwhelmed on the front lines, the defence collapsed in spectacular fashion, because most of the rest of it was orc fodder and Ranald infantry, which is going to be no match in terms of quality, particularly for Gondor, but even Rohan's not going to have too much trouble against that with their Westmark units, which are here in force. But yeah, so we'll see. I mean, they do have a lot of quality left in their town centre. Let's see here. I'm fascinated to see what happens to this unit of flag rim. I mean, the Gondor archers are coming. I mean, the Gondor archers have mounted a ram, which they're sort of going to try and push, you know, right the way to the keep, I suppose. But I mean, the flag rim is in the way, so at the very least they'll be delayed. But also by the same token, I can't really imagine this unit of flag rim being victorious with only 14 of them left. They may be AP, they may be a quality unit of infantry. There's a lot of archers to mulch their way through, and like I said, even without the armour upgrades, Gondor's survivability is better than most other kingdoms of men. Most other western kingdoms of men. And here are the flag rim. Let's just go up to ×2 speed here. Again, I don't really know when to make a cut on a large fight like this, because obviously things can get underway pretty quickly. I mean, it could be that they're already attacking the keep, and we'll get back over there in just a moment. But here comes the Gondor archers. Are they going to just try and avoid the flag rim? They've just sort of given up on the ram, they can't be bothered to push it? Or are they going to get into melee? It is going to be, well, they're just going to try and run past, I think, but they're already shaken. I mean, morale could be the killer here. The Gondor archers really not enjoying being in melee with the grossly incandescent Easterlings. Again, I still feel as though the numbers are what's going to be the killer here. Dragon banners going up against the banners of the White Tree. pretty long-standing rivalry between the Easterlings of Rune and the Men of Gondor. Yeah, I mean, defeat seems certain. At this point, I feel fairly confident. Well, I mean, shaken. They're still eager. It really comes down to whether or not the Gondor archers break. If they don't, then they'll be fine. But if they do, then the edge of the map is right there. They will not be coming back. Meanwhile, all quiet on this front. They're still waiting for the siege towers to get up into position. I think I will make a little cut as soon as this little micro fight, this little microcosm in the battle is decided. I mean, certainly you can see that individually the Flag Rim are having no problem buttering the bread of these Gondorian archers. The armor upgrades in this particular situation probably wouldn't have helped them much with the AP from the Flag Rim. They're just having to pull out their sort of side swords here to try and kill them off. Again, they're still shaken. And the Flag Rim are holding firm. I don't know, you know, the Flag Rim could pull this off. All of a sudden victory seems certain. I mean, for every man they lose, it is a pretty grievously felt loss, though. I mean, it's better that they sort of die with their axes and maces in hand, I suppose, than routing off the field. They're still steady, after all. Whereas the Gondor archers are still shaken and exhausted. Absolutely crazy. We are getting into sort of the final 20k frames at this point in time. And again, like I said, a lead for the attackers of 9%. That is not insurmountable with all of the elites. Just 9 of them left. Easterlings holding firm. And it goes to show that, you know, obviously skirmishers and melee are certainly not the best. It's certainly just sort of when you throw them in after they're out of ammunition, basic skirmishers like this, you can't expect them to work miracles. After all, a unit of 70 is, if they do win, it looks as though they're going to lose even. They can't even finish off just over a dozen Flag Rim. Well, just to make sure that I'm not missing out on too much, you can see here the Numenorean Shadow Guard already actually firing away. They're firing their arrows up into the sky, however, which, as the attackers, I'll probably be pretty happy with that. I mean, what are they going after? Fountain Guard? I mean, Fountain Guard is a juicy target, to be sure, but as the Rangers, what you really want from them is to get them into a position where they can shoot through enemy ranks, not onto them, because otherwise the body piercing is not really coming into effect. Arcing the shots of your archers is never something you really want to do if you can help it, but especially not with Rangers. Rangers, definitely the worst to do that with. Rangers and crossbows. And of course the combination of the two in the black box. Yeah, you can see here, definitely trying to make sure that the attackers can't use their own archers to too great of an extent. Riddermark archers and helping us over here. Still sort of the calm before the storm over here. Meanwhile, these brave Easterlings, it looks as though they are finally being overcome. Yeah, finally the lack of manpower over here is going to finish them off, but they can certainly be proud of their day's work over here against the Gondor archers. And again, it just goes to show that a unit of dedicated infantry is always going to be stronger in this sort of fight, even with sort of a pretty serious manpower disadvantage. They could have, you know, maybe 1 or 2 more men and they probably would have come out on top there. I'd be interested to see how that would have played out if it were a hybrid unit. How much the Gondorians would have won by. Even so, that is a question for another day. There are a few units over here which are still moving. They're routing though. Just a couple of units routing around the map like headless chickens. And there goes the local Flag Rim. Gondor archers rightly celebrating their hard-earned victory. But unfortunately for them, they're probably just going to be sent forward and put into the meat grinder at some point, as this defence is looking pretty mean. There's a lot of spears, there's a lot of halberds. Now, was that the Troll Catapult? The Troll Catapult is not firing. I'd be very interested to see what the Gondorian Catapult does. Now, I wouldn't actually use the Catapult to open holes in the wall. Maybe one, but I would want to save a lot of the ammunition to kill clustered defenders. If you can push the defenders back to that hill, the Catapult for an attacker, it's so useful. The alternative, of course, is that you try and snipe out the Troll Catapult. And they do actually manage to kill off one of the Catapult crewmen here, but the reverse is also true. I mean, the Troll Catapult is going to have a field day if the attackers just sort of pour in and blob up. The Catapult is going to be very, very useful indeed. So the catapults from both sides could be the kingmakers here. And I think he is trying to snipe out the catapult, but if you're going to do that, you should really turn flaming ammunition off. It's very good for killing off infantry, but if you want to snipe something out, the flaming ammunition is significantly less accurate. A few Eastern crossbows dying off. I mean, at least they're not hitting nothing, but it's nothing really critical. That's probably been my criticism of this catapult use throughout this entire battle. They have hit stuff, but nowhere near enough. Not in the quantities they need to. Whereas you can see Dark Elven King so far has been very content to be more patient with his catapult. He is now using it. He might actually be trying to snipe out the Gondor catapult at this point, which I would be quite content to actually let the Gondorians waste their ammunition. I mean, they're not really going to hit anything critical. Just hide your catapult away. The catapult is reforming. There is also the fact that the Troll catapult crew is actually somewhat useful in melee. Regular catapult crews are literally the worst units in the game in terms of how good they are in melee. Here we go though. The assault on the keep has begun, and Decor is leading the way with his Elisar's vanguard. And the Mordor defense is being led by the Nazgul. So this is a statement of intent very early on from both teams here. They are not going to give up the walls or take the walls easily. But this is a lot of Elisar's vanguard. Unfortunately, however, for the attackers, the defenders are going to have the advantage of being able to utilise all of these very nasty skirmishers. The Eastern crossbows are in place, and the Elisar's vanguard's job would have been hard enough just trying to get the Nazgul out of the way. With crossbow bolts also sort of piercing their sides, it's going to be much more difficult. They should be receiving some reinforcements, however. You can see the CAIR ANDROS Swordmasters getting these siege towers into position. A lot of siege towers in position, so they're going to be blanketing the walls. Unfortunately for them, they don't have any rams nearby, I don't think, which is a problem. This is a pretty serious oversight from the attackers if they've forgotten to bring a ram, because it means that, I mean, they still can open up the gates, but they would have to use their catapult. Those Gondor archers that were bringing the ram, are they now doing so? They are, but they are a long way away from the action as it's happening. It's a pretty serious oversight, because they really need to be attacking the walls and going through the gates, I think, because you're always going to take some pretty hefty losses if you go up onto the walls, especially seeing as it's such an easy place for the defensive skirmishers to shoot you. So again, all of those gains they made with that aggressive push when the outer lines fell apart could be being undone here. It's a lot of siege towers they brought out. A lot of the time you only see 1 or 2 siege towers being used to get all of the attacks, I should say, into position, and they sort of commit the rest through the gates. Here though, at least the lack of rams is being sort of remedied somewhat by a huge amount of siege tower presence, and the fact that they're sort of not shy about using their elite units to try and gain some ground. I mean, Riddermark spears are not exactly elite, and there are some Helmingas in there as well, but the Elisar's vanguard were here initially. They have been brutalised by the crossbows, however. Morale on infantry, 7 of them being moved forward. Definitely a very token effort. But over here, Black Legion of Barad-dûr, again a very depleted unit, but a much more healthy unit, and Sauron's Will also coming over here. The Sauron's Will obviously up on the walls with their heavy AP damage. Going to be very, very useful. The arrow tower is also in effect here as well, which is something the defenders can count on to get a good amount of kills if the attackers take too long about attacking. Again, just allowing those units to get some kills. Units, defensive fortifications, I should say. Sauron's Will, meanwhile, and Temple Execution sort of trying to hide behind the hill over here. The Rohan, Player Ending Flame, and Pavlos they're not going to stand for that. They want those units out in the open. So they're going to force them to move with the presence of these archers and these javelins. Those Temple Executioners certainly need to move, because they're not going to be able to get out of range of the Riddermark archers unless they sort of go behind the hill. Pelagear Marines will be able to do a decent amount of damage. The sting of that AP. There's some more Westmark spearmen up on the siege tower there, but they don't seem too eager to jump down, which is unfortunate, because they could start to really clear a space here. Whereas over here, the attackers are really starting to feel the pressure. There's a lot of javelins that just flew in there, and that's a big break. That ram is still so far away as well. I mean, again, this is a pretty broken assault. They need to be going through all of these siege towers all at once, force the defenders to commit a huge amount of infantry to these walls. And over time, you would have to say that the quality of the Gondorians should be able to do enough damage to at least force the attackers back to the hill. And then the defenders can think of what to do next. But as it is, I mean, they're committing piecemeal far too much. And again, this might be just an issue of timing. They've got all of these siege towers in place, but they aren't quite ready to commit those units yet. The CAIR Andros Swordmasters are a good unit, but they're just being swarmed by Sauron's Will and Black Legion at Barad-dûr. More units getting onto the walls here though. Wardens of the White Tower, again, more elite units as Eowyn's shield maidens, but the Sauron's Will over here once again. I'm not sure if they're actually going after the Eastron crossbowmen, but if they are, they shouldn't with that catapult. Here comes the Wardens of the White Tower once again, moving to engage this mass of Sauron's most faithful servants to Sauron's Will. Well, those Wardens of the White Tower running with their tail between their legs. And I feel as though at this point, again, I mean, Westmark Infantry, they're retreating their Wardens of the White Tower, but they're committing Westmark Infantry. I mean, that to me is certainly not the right thing to do. I mean, Westmark Infantry is not the answer to this situation here. You need mass troops on the wall. Once again, however, only one unit is sort of making its way up here. It looks as though this is a token effort, however, and they're just sort of waiting for the opportunity to commit more. But it's a very broken assault, this. I'm not really seeing much sense in how the attackers are sort of laying this assault out. 1 minute they're using this siege tower, then they're using this one, then they're sort of retreating down this one and using this one, and they're using this one on the other side. They should just be using all of them. Trying to buckle the defenders with sheer force of numbers, because they had the percentage advantage going into this fight. That is being eaten into now. Only by 1% so far, but you have to imagine that that is going to close even further if the attackers keep up this manner. CAIR Andros Swordmasters victory almost a certainty. But I mean, that goes to show how good they are in melee, and the fact that the Black Legion of Barad-dûr are not necessarily the best at this sort of thing. Because the CAIR Andros Swordmasters 1-to-1 would easily beat Black Legion of Barad-dûr, but it's the support of the javelins nearby which would worry me. Meanwhile, the Elisar's Vanguard, another unit of Elisar's Vanguard, back for round 2 with the Nazgul, who still have not lost a single unit model. Where is that ram? My kingdom for a ram. Still though, these Gondorians resolutely facing these Mordor forces, and again they need to use this siege tower here. If they got another unit up here, this wall would be in real trouble, and it would force the defenders to either retreat or commit more units. Again, the defenders are at their most comfortable when they don't have to do much. If their defense is holding firm, they can just sort of sit back and take in the view. This is a little bit more like it. I mean, Nimlothian Honor Guard coming up onto the wall to support the Westmark Infantry again. The Westmarks were never really going to be able to take on this task all on their lonesome. If the Wardens of the White Tower had been up there with them, maybe. Especially with the reinforcements from the Nimlothian Honor Guard. But as it was, whoever's Wardens of the White Tower those were, Pavlos's, I think he lost his nerve a little bit there. And wanted his general out of there. When perhaps the general was exactly what was needed. Meanwhile, the Elisar's Vanguard, once again, just taking a plethora of ranged fire from all sorts of sources. Eastron crossbows probably being the most concerning one. How are the Nazgul doing? A couple of them are dead now. Once again, Pavlos, he could be running with his tail between his legs once again. You know, he committed his Elisar's Vanguard up onto the wall, but as soon as the heat was turned up, he ran. Which again is not necessarily the wrong thing to do, but if he keeps doing it, he's just going to be hemorrhaging his unit models. He needs to commit to something eventually. Here is the CAIR Andros Swordmaster block. Still making progress, but at this point they are becoming the target of more and more of these skirmishers. The Eastron crossbows in particular are going to be the sort of unit which is going to do a lot of damage to CAIR Andros Swordmasters. Heavy hitting crossbow bolts. Numenorian Shadow Guard, there may only be 10 of them. Still doing their bit though after being brutally charged by the Aerid of Oldburg. More Eowyn shield pains coming forward. I mean, the attackers do still have a good amount of resources, but so do the defenders. Which is what I would be concerned about if I were the attackers. Meanwhile, my favourite Rohan unit, the Westmark Marshals, coming in, especially with the new unit model upgrade they're getting in 0.97. They look very, very nice indeed. Certainly differentiates them from the Riddermark Axemen. They're in, and their AP combined with the AP of the Nimlothian Honor Guard is certainly the sort of thing to give these Mordor units some pause. Orc Javelins in melee are clearly not the answer to a shielded Fountain Guard. But still, the main problem here is the skirmishers. These Eastron crossbows have got a perfect angle to shoot into this infantry. And Eastron crossbows are not even that expensive. They are very much the glass cannons, and That's a interesting move. The gates have opened. I don't know if that's what Mordor wanted to do. Because now the attackers could potentially pour in down here, and the Fountain Guard are starting to make their move. The Ram is not even here yet. The Westmark Spearmen are going to follow them in. How well will this go? I mean, the Temple Executioners are right there, but the Fountain Guard have a phalanx. The Orc Javelins, however, are going to get a point-blank shot if Decor is not careful. We also have the Flag Rim coming in. I mean, this is not the best formation for the Fountain Guard to be fighting in. And straight away, those Orc Javelins with their low-quality wooden sticks killing off a few of these elite men from Gondor. Westmark Spears are coming in to try and reinforce, but if that was a bait and switch from the defenders, it was well executed. Because the Fountain Guard are going to have to retreat, and they're taking losses all the while. And the Fountain Guard are going to retreat and basically hang these Westmark Spears out to dry, because the Flag Rim and the Executioners between them will easily kill off the Rohan Spears. So far, however, the best performers up on these wall fights have definitely been the CAIR ANDROS Swordmasters from Gondor, which is good because it's not a unit you see a lot of the time. Human Swordmaster units in general are actually pretty niche in how they can be used, but here they've done a pretty good job. They've carved their way through the units that they've had to face, which is good. CAIR ANDROS Swordsmen are also, Swordmasters are also a very nice looking unit, I think, especially with those large swords. The Raven Helms of CAIR ANDROS, as they will be called in the upcoming patch. But I suppose it's only right that this is a unit which is doing quite well in these fights, because obviously they are fighting on home turf. Well, this Orc Banner Carrier is probably not enjoying or relishing the fact that he has to go up against a very angry man with a very large sword. There are the Fountain Guard, but again, not really in the best of formations, and these upgraded Temple Executioners doing what they do best, slaughtering Sauron's enemies. Another unit of Fountain Guard coming in, which again, good to see that, you know, the assault is continuing. Some Númenorian Shadow Guard on the way across, Sauron's Will here. More Sauron's Will, so obviously again, this is where retreating so many men to the keep does start to pay dividends, because they have plenty of reserves that they can keep committing forward to these fights before they ultimately start to feel the strain of this. There's Gondor infantry back there again. These are the sort of units which need to be committed forward. I think that the attackers have been far too passive when it comes to situations like this. Where the bloody hell is that Ram? I mean, it must be somewhere. The Ram is here. They brought it halfway and then decided to just sort of leave it there, which is a very weird decision from Decor, I have to say. Those Gondor archers which performed so admirably against the Loke Flag Rim suddenly took leave of their senses. I suppose they feel as though they don't need it anymore because this gate is open. This gate, however, is still closed, and a ram would be just the ticket. There is also the danger that they could be forced back out of the gate, of course. I mean, with all of these reinforcements so close, I kind of doubt that that would actually happen. I mean, it's still a potential problem. I mean, here you can see that this section of wall was cleared off, finally. And they're going to try and sort of go down this section, try and come off the wall and into the main settlement itself. But the Westmark Marshals and the Westmark Infantry are going to be confronted with, yes, the Gap Rim, but the Olag High is probably what's concerning them more. The Westmark Marshals, ironically, would actually be a pretty good thing to send against the Olag High if they were supported and the Olag High were isolated because of the AP. But in this situation, they've already taken a bit of a beating, and the Olag High will have no trouble using their big clubs to do some real damage. Meanwhile, this is a good push from the attackers, and they need to keep going. The Orc Javelins and the Baltroth Tribesmen are throwing their javelins in here, but you can see that in terms of manpower, they're starting to make some progress. So this is where, if you're the attackers, if you're taking catapult and javelin fire, you need to push through. You need to commit more units. You need to try and break the back of this defence and start pouring in. It's the only way that they're really going to make any sort of gains here, I think. I mean, we are into the final 10,000 frames at this point, so the battle will be decided one way or the other. So that leads me to believe the attackers will take my advice and push in. There's a lot of these runic units left, though. Flag Rim and Gamp Rim, as well as Scion Rim. The heart and soul of the runic army is still available to them. And again, I don't think that Gondor archers are really the heroes that this front line needs. You can see the damage that the javelins have done already. One good hit from the Troll Catapult and things would also fall apart, although the Troll Catapult has wisely stopped shooting, because at this point this attack is starting to run out of steam. The tribesmen out of ammunition, so they're just being sort of committed to melee now, getting in the way. Sauron's will forcing the attackers back once more. Some Westmark marshals down there, Gondor spears. I have to say, I'm giving the advantage to the the defenders here. I think that the forces of evil are going to be able to hold on to CAIR Andros here, because I think the assault has just been too broken. The battle did have 3 phases, technically. There was the initial assault, which I feel as though the defenders had slightly the better of. Then the middle, just after the collapse, which the attackers had the better of. And now I feel as though the defenders are gaining the upper hand pretty significantly once again. I feel as though the assault has just been too stretched. They needed to sort of commit, have a much more unified assault. Because they have done damage. I mean, over here they've taken the wall, basically. If they commit more reinforcements up here, with the help of the Citadel Guard, they've pushed the forces of evil off this wall. And now, if they wanted to, they could potentially get some archers up here, start shooting into the settlement, or start pouring in. But as it is, it doesn't look like they have anything really that can take advantage of this. I mean, there's no reinforcements anywhere near. It looks as though they're committing most of their resources over to here, to this one gate. I mean, the Hornburg sentries are pushing in now, but allowing the defenders to focus their fire is one of the worst sins you can commit as an attacker. The Olag Kai coming in here to just squash these Helmingars with those big old clubs and hammers, certainly doing their damage. Crossbows and the javelins still in position. The Gamprim are now sort of shifting their focus over here. The Carmel's Chosen are in melee as well. The Westmark Marshals are here. The AP will be appreciated. The Great Shields of the Hornburg sentries pushing their way through, but they immediately take a full volley from the Eastron crossbows. They're going to force the Orc Javelins to retreat. I think the problem here is the defenders simply have too many skirmishers to try and deal with. The attackers are going to have to try and engage all of them in melee all at once. Here come the Ramesek garrison. This large blob of runic troops has now been engaged, but there's so many of them, the Citadel Guard are probably going to be overwhelmed. It's good to see at least that more and more troops are being sort of committed up onto this wall to one of the sections where they are having a bit of an advantage. They're pushing through the gate. The attackers are also now getting more troops up onto this wall. Gondor spearmen backed up with Fountain Guard, so this wall is finally going to fall. So eventually, the attackers are going to be able to push the defenders back to the hill. And they're also using their cavalry in the one sort of window that they're going to have in this fight, because now that the defenders are sort of going to have to try and reorganise themselves, this is the time to try and use the cavalry. Unfortunately for them, they're having to try and march through the Olag Kai, and as if that wasn't enough, the gap in the line is being closed by Scion Rim. That's going to be the end of the cavalry. I mean, you weren't going to be able to use the cavalry at any other time, I don't think. Trying to sort of make it when the defenders are looking a little bit ropey was the right thing to do, even if it didn't come off. Bit of friendly fire there. Perhaps more friendly fire than actually killing the right targets. But here, at this point, these Hornburg sentries and Westmark Marshals are cut off, because those runic forces have now closed the gap that they used to charge through here. And that's going to be the end of the Hornburg sentries and the Westmark Marshals, I think. They are cut off. And as if that wasn't enough, they're going up against Temple Executioners, which... and, you know, surrounded by Gamprim as well. But the Temple Executioners obviously so strong, especially against Axemen like this. They're broken and fighting to the death now. That's going to be that. I mean, good work there from the defenders, because the attackers finally managed to sort of punch a hole in the defence, but they were able to reseal it. And now this attack has fallen to pieces. Rune coming in with the reinforcements. Numenorian Shadow Guard in melee. Karmul's Shadow Guard. Elsewhere, the attackers have managed to sort of get more of a presence up on the walls, but I mean, I fear for the attackers here, I really do. I can't really see them winning this at this point. I think the superior position of the defenders. There goes a general at the hands of the Nazgul and the Temple Executioners there. There are Gondor infantry again. Gondor infantry. At this point, the Olag Kai are pretty depleted, it's fair to say. Another one of them falls, but they've certainly performed their role as being a real disruption, a destroyer of the battlefield, as it were. But this could be the end of them. I mean, backed up by Carmel's Chosen, you never know, I suppose. Gondor once again are going to commit more units through the gate. The guards of Osgiliath coming forward. I mean, at this point, they really don't have much of a choice. They need to just commit something forward and try and break the defenders somewhere. But I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, Gondor infantry, at this point, they're going to try and get into the settlement itself. I mean, they're going to give up control of the wall again, because these Flag Rim have been fighting resolutely up here for some time. So they're going to be able to reclaim this wall and essentially shut off this avenue of attack. There's still Wardens of the White Tower, there's still cavalry, there's archers, Pelargir Marines. I just don't think the attackers have got what it takes anymore. I mean, to be fair, the defenders don't have much in the way of reserves at this point either, but they still have stuff like the Dragon's Wrath crossbows. And that could be a real killer. To be fair though, I mean, a lot of their resources have been committed, and if we have a look at the percentage of kills, it is now dead even, so the the defenders have brought it back. And again, I'm so used to the forces of evil being on the attack, I suppose, but this time they get to defend, and they've done well. Carmel's chosen up here on the walls, getting ready to face anything that comes up these siege towers once again. And the attackers do still have reserves at the very least. I mean, the defenders have got very little, and a lot of their percentage is made up of stuff like Orc Javelins and Eastron Crossbows, stuff that is useless in melee. And Rune, at this point, are really the centrepiece of this defence, because they still have a lot of their unit, like sort of mainline units like Gamp Rim, Scion Rim, Flag Rim. They're all here. Whereas a lot of the Mordor forces bound up in stuff like the Troll Catapult, the Temple Executioners, more elites. A lot of their mainline stuff is long dead. Those Dragon's Wrath crossbows there, that's going to be a real problem. It's still very close. I mean, the attackers can still win this, but they need to be far more unified in what they're doing than they've been thus far. This cavalry could be useful again. I'm staggered that they dropped that ram. That ram needed to come in here and open up the other gate as well. Trying to pull and stretch the defenders as much as possible is always a way to go about things, as the carnage up on the walls. Temple Executioners here, up here with the Nazgul, finishing off these units. It is worth saying as well that some of the percentage of the defenders at this point is bound up in their Nazgul, which, that's a low percentage, but it's a lot of power. Here are the Meduzal Guard. That's another unit which I actually forgot about. They haven't been committed yet, but it might be too late for them to actually affect the fight meaningfully. They're so lethal with their javelins, and they're very, very good in melee as well, but time will tell, I suppose, whether or not this is going to be enough. I still feel as though Rune have got just too much mainline strength left. They're being backed up by the Temple Executioners, these Gondorians with their backs to the walls. It's only basic Gondor infantry as well, so they're hemmed in here, and they're just being defeated here. Bled out at the wrists. And to think they had a 10% advantage, sort of at the halfway mark of this fight, and it has abandoned them. Ramazekor garrison now charging in through the gap, but I mean, at this point again it's a bit of a wet noodle contest over here as the Orc Javelins face off against the Ramazekor garrison. Just this pile of bodies at this point. Might be a bit grisly, but it would, you know, this is definitely not the sort of thing which would just be flat at this point. There would almost be a mound that the attackers would have to sort of move around and through. But obviously, it is a bit grisly, and Medieval 2 not going to be able to simulate that. Flag Rim just sort of content to sit up here on the walls, and again, they are sort of blocking this potential route for reinforcements. I mean, Wardens of the White Tower now, and Nimlothian Honor Guard potentially finally being committed. And I think the Flag Rim, they don't fancy fighting them up on the wall, so they are going to pull back. But this is going to allow them to come out down here, which is just going to hasten the demise of these very basic Gondor units that are sort of forced with their backs to these stone walls. Here comes another assault, the Gondorian Catapult pushing in. Can the Catapult get some significant hits? The Gondor Cavalry is in here as well, trying to do what it can, but again, there's Scion Rim, there's Gamp Rim all over the place. Like I said, it was good that they used the cavalry when they did, because the chances of them being able to use cavalry at this stage of the fight was always going to be fairly low. As the snow continues to fall, certainly not the most natural weather for the Easterlings in particular to be fighting in. But they've taken it like ducks to water. Still the Arid of Alberg, the Meduzal Guard moving forward, Pelargir Marines, still a fair few Javelins. Another fresh unit of CAIR ANDROS Swordmasters, but they're going to be introduced to the Nazgul, unfortunately for them. And now a bit of a retreat. think they're just going to sort of reorganise their defensive lines here, Rune. I have to say, Son of the Dunedain has done very well at that. I don't think... Son of the Dunedain is one of those players that very rarely plays an evil faction, but I think he's done very well as Rune in this fight. A new lease on life, perhaps, one of the players admitting defeat. And yeah, you can see this has been the problem ever since they started laying siege to this keep at the back. I mean, I think that is because one of the player who, I think Decor, has admitted defeat here. Which is unfortunate, again. I mean, there was the potential that they maybe could have turned this around, but seeing the way the wind was blowing, it was unlikely, to be fair. I think the attackers have very much got this in the bag at this point. But that has been the issue that the attackers have had ever since they've come to this keep. They've attacked, and then they were repulsed. They attacked, and then they were repulsed. They needed to attack from multiple angles with a lot of strength, I think, and then they would have had much more joy. That's how the attackers usually go about their business. The Orcs can afford to do that a little bit more with a lot more of their disposable troops, but again, even here, the quality and durability of the Gondorian infantry should have been enough. They could have done more than they did at the very least. They could have made the defenders work for their defensive position here in the keep a little bit more than they did. Not to say the attackers did badly by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, a lot of these players I haven't seen play before, and in those regards, they've done very well. But even so, I mean, it's at this point it's sort of my part-time job to criticise, I suppose. So I don't mean anything by it, really. Carmel's Shadowbows and Temple Guard again. It's very difficult to sort of gauge how well the archers have done throughout the battle again. You can see the firing lines of the Carmel's Shadowbows, Rangers. I think the Dragon's Wrath crossbows can afford to just put their feet up here, because I don't think their services are going to be required to win this fight. The Eowyn Shield Maidens trying to get some point-blank volleys into the Carmel's Chosen. It's difficult to break the Eowyn Shield Maidens, but all of these angry Easterlings I think are just going to be able to force them onto the retreat once again. I think that the Gondorian attempt to reclaim CAIR ANDROS has gone as far as it can. And all the hard work at Minas Tirith ultimately for nothing as Sauron manages to hold on to a pretty important fort here. The area of Oldberg sort of buzzing around, trying to do what they can. The Orc Javelins have counter-attacked into Wardens of the White Tower, which is pretty amusing. Here the Methuselah Guard. They're going to fire at something, by the looks of things. And they're trying to fire up onto the walls, but that's certainly not the easiest shot. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, all of these units, yeah, they were brought back to the main line. So this is going to be the end. Methuselah Guard are here. Big old round shields. They are going to be a tough nut to crack, to be fair, but alongside the ones to the White Tower, but I think it's going to be all over. In fact, they might admit defeat here, purely because just over 1,000 frames, I don't think that they'll be able to kill off units as elite as this unless they brought the Dragon's Wrath crossbow down to sort of blast them from close range. So I think we might be seeing an admit defeat here from the Gondorians and the Rohirrim fairly soon. The Temple Executioners and the Nazgul bottling up the Wardens of the White Tower. Temple Executioners, of course, can most certainly take the Wardens of the White Tower on. More runic forces coming up here as well, so Flagrim adding their maces to the fight once more. And it was well played from the defenders. I feel as though the defenders do deserve a victory because of how well organised their defence ultimately was. They had a bit of a blip in the middle where things fell apart pretty quickly and they sort of had a mad dash to try and retreat. But the attackers did well to take advantage of, to be fair. But ultimately, they were able to retreat quite a lot back to this very defensive position in the keep. And not bringing a ram is a very questionable decision at best. And even then, they went all the way back to get that ram, that unit of Gondor archers which bravely defeated that unit of Flagrim to sort of claim dominion over that ram and bring it to the front line. They abandoned it halfway through because one of the gates opened of its own accord, but there are 2 gates in CAIR Andros, and as the attackers you always need to sort of attack from as many angles as possible. Letting the defenders focus their forces is never a good thing, especially not when they've got skirmishers to the extent that the defenders have here. Crossbows, rangers, javelins, Dragon's Wrath crossbows, normal archers, AP archers, they had the lot. And they were allowed to use them in exactly the way that they wanted to. And that, I think, ultimately is the reason why the attackers were not able to hold on to their advantage into the late game here. But yeah, this is going to be the end. They are going to admit defeat before all of their units are killed. Bit of a hole in the gate, though. And so Flame is going to be the last attacker left standing. I think at this point he is going to admit defeat, however. A singular unit of Wards of the White Tower, no matter how tanky they are not going to be enough to defeat all of this. But yes, as we sort of pan away from the fight that's still happening up on the wall, the forces of evil are going to be able to hold on. Close in terms of percentage of kills, though. And again, if none of the attackers had admitted defeat and they had sort of fought to the bitter end, it probably would have been within 10%, to be fair. You know, a lot of similar kills across the board, because obviously this is a relatively unique situation in which the Orcs are the ones defending, so a little bit more in terms of numbers, but certainly less in terms of quality. But it was, I think, the elites of the defenders here in the late game which managed to pull them over the line. You saw that having numbers on the defence doesn't necessarily win you the battle in that first phase, because while they initially actually had the better of the engagement, when they started to fall apart, when those Minas Morgul Chosen started to fall away, you know, the low quality units from Mordor started to collapse en masse. So having more numbers out there didn't necessarily help them so much. It was really into the late game when their elites started to help them and come back into the fold. Rohan actually getting the most kills from the attackers, which I think makes a certain amount of sense. The Air of Oldberg doing well. Also, there was a lot of AP that they were able to bring to bear. Whereas the Gondorians, I think, Decor and Pavlos's side in the initial engagement wasn't as efficient. Even then, Ending Flame and Flame's armies also had to deal with a lot of arrow fire as well. But it was the late game truly where the battle was decided. The defenders had very organised, you know, they knew what they wanted to do. The attackers, meanwhile, too passive, too conservative. Again, it's something that I'll continue to say for as long as it persists, and it will always do so, because obviously not everyone, you know, knows the ins and outs of the game. Yeah, I mean, too passive in the late game, really. You know, they attacked through very linear sort of avenues of assault, and they were rebutted every time, and that really is the key here. Meanwhile, we'll be able to see two units, because it is going to be both of the Mordor armies. So Dark Elven King, Orc Archers doing very well, Olag High also doing very well, Temple Executioners. So again, initially his low tier skirmishers did well early on, which sort of speaks for the fact that the defenders were able to sort of lay a bit of a hurting on the attackers early. And his elites also did quite well. That Moran Guard getting 0 kills, however. So it goes to show that when the attackers did come forward with quality in the early game, the low quality Orcs were not able to hold the line. Olag High doing very well, of course, so again, like, they can be real destroyers in melee. Stu Balrog, on the other hand, let's see what did the damage for him. The Nazgul, again, very comfortable in a sustained melee fight. They were up on the wall right from the off, so it doesn't surprise me to see that they got kills. They also took some damage, to be fair, but ultimately most of them lived to fight another day. Sauron's Will doing okay, a few units getting over 100, Moran on infantry, one of the units doing okay, but again, less kills over here overall, and the Númenórean Shadow Guard getting over 200 kills as well. Rangers, you would kind of expect that. I don't think, again, yeah, just under 100 kills here, so the Rangers not proving to be quite the same destroyers of worlds that they were in other siege battles, but even so. Very well played to the defenders. Not often we see the Orcs actually on the defence, and this time they were able to pull out the victory. And again, when it comes to a siege like this, when you're outnumbered by an army, it's always a sort of situation where the attackers have a sort of natural advantage, although I feel as though that was slightly offset by the fact that clearly the defenders are more experienced players, so it was a much more even playing field from that regard, but the defenders were still able to pull out the win here. Yeah, and I think all of them deserve well. Rune in the late game, Mordor, obviously with their elites, like they usually do, performing very, very well. This fight was winnable by the Gondorians, however, you know, and I feel as though with all the quality, with the support from the Rohan AP as well, it was very winnable. But as it was, again, these sorts of things will come with experience for these players. You know, they'll get better at it as time goes on, I'm sure. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this fight. Big thank you to Dark Elven King for sending this one in for me. Again, another large-scale siege. And everyone always likes seeing more of WK's made maps, because obviously I really like CAIR Andros as well. I remember the first time I played one, it was very, very enjoyable. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next, which may very well be a scenario that I got sent by rules. I'm not quite sure yet. Again, the order of when I do things is sort of always quite up in the air, because I have a selection usually to pick from. But yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.